Alright, welcome to a new sort of series slash episode thing, where it is based on Adizz Pro, so thanks for him making a series so I can make this video, I suppose. And yeah, we're going to be looking at the rise and fall, and rise and fall, and rise and fall, and rise of the Dutch Empire. So, the Dutch were a group of people, explorers, from the old country, the Orange Team, that used to be in Bulgaria. They would expand onto the northern European plains. They were pretty self-sufficient because you got some excellent land, good resources and stuff, and they managed to easily expand into Scandinavia and the British Isles until all that stuff rebelled away. Gradually, other countries would arrive on their borders as they expanded into Europe, but it was kind of a slow process really, so that eventually happened. After these areas rebelled away, we saw the independence of the British countries, along with Norway and Sweden. A few episodes later, the Dutch got involved in a massive war, which included the entire Mediterranean Sea, as the Purple Team and their alliance, which I haven't really shown, I said the Iberians for some reason, ended up going to war with countries like the Red Team, the Farmers Union, and also the North African country. The Dutch team would get involved towards the end, which would be a very important war for them, as they would get access to the Mediterranean Sea. A bit before that, actually, I've kind of done this bit of the slide a bit wrong. The Dutch would go on to discover Florida and the entire Americas beyond that, so that's pretty good. Over this time, following the war with the Purple Team, and just in the period up to World War I, the Dutch would go closer to the countries in the Triangle Alliance, like the African Union, Iberia, and Catalonia, and also the French, who they're pretty aligned with, like culturally, economically, as their biggest trade partner, very close by. They just worked well with them. During this time, they would make some new allies and also some enemies. They created a sort of vassal state here in Austria, as they gave one of their princes their own country, but they also declared war on England, which is an entire general British area, but they didn't really get up into Scotland. The Polish, giant yellow Polish Empire that had come back, and also Sweden. They would get together with the nations of Europe to divide up Africa, so the Dutch would get their own huge colony in South Africa, and also the remainder of Madagascar that hadn't been colonized by the Lime Team. There's all the other countries who were involved. Yeah, I've drawn a lot of countries for this. In the early 1800s, I suppose, for this series, the Dutch would start beefing with the Gold Team Empire, who's this yak-looking thing, and eventually that would lead to World War I. The Gold Team Empire would go to war with the Russians over a trade route. The Red Team would get involved in the Middle Eastern theater. You know, the Ukrainians had their own alliance with the weird, it's like a Warsaw lilac country, lilac bear, the Turkish country, and the Romans. However, other countries like the green sort of Eastern European country and the Lime Team would get involved. The Triangle Alliance would join to try and stop the Romans, but the Romans would completely obliterate the Italian Union and accidentally end up obliterating a Dutch military base, which would get the Dutch involved. And that would really kind of begin the end for this war, as the Dutch eviscerated the entire Roman advance and also pushed through the Eastern Front all the way into the Gold Team, and working with the Russians and the Red Team, well, and the Farmers Union, they managed to capitulate the country. Following that, they would gain some new colonies from the Lime Team, such as Lime Team Alaska and Lime Team Northern Madagascar. After that, just after World War I actually, the world would be entirely filled in, so we would see the Dutch at their peak colonial stuff, with colonies in Madagascar, South Africa, North America, and also in Western Australia. There's the Swan of Western Australia. They would become even closer with the Triangle Alliance. However, arrogance within the Dutch, becoming now the strongest country in the entire world, would lead them to believe that the Triangle Alliance is kind of just their puppet alliance. But here's all the cool countries. I like how the North Yugoslav country looks. They're one of my favourites. Unfortunately, the Square Alliance would grow, and they become very anti-Dutch in their colonial ambitions. This is between the Russians, the Old Empire, and the Norwegians. And eventually, in like the 1850s, I think Adizz said it was, the Russians would declare war on Poland, and yeah, that would start World War II. The Triangle Alliance would get involved in defending Poland as the Greeks sent forces into the Old Empire. The Russians would manage to push the entire way through Poland. For some reason the Dutch aren't up here, but they should be. And the Dutch would finally get involved, pushing back the Russians, but not too far. They also fought in the Balkans and sent troops to fight in Iberia, as well as the the African Union, sorry, and also the Iberians joined to help defeat allies such as France, which is Green Cat France, woohoo, the Dark Cyan country, and also Catalonia. And in the end, the Dutch would lose, being completely isolated, trying to push their vassal country, but failing in that. And yeah, they wouldn't go too well for them, as they were fighting all these guys in Europe. They were trying to pull in some more allies towards the end of the war, such as the Green Team, the Lime Team, and their vassal Austrians. But with the joining of India and China, who helped destroy all their colonial ambitions, the rebellions in North America, and the Indians sending forces to southern Africa, and the Chinese defeating Western Australia, the Dutch would lose everything, but here was their land at their peak. A lot of cool stuff, but they lost it all. So, just following World War II, they looked like this, with not really any colonies. The Kerguelen Islands, I suppose, could be here, but there's no point, really. Following that, the Triangle Alliance would be disbanded, except for France and Catalonia, and they'd all be very sad. Look at the Italian Union. I think, which, is that Lombardy? Lombardy's got a weird snake. Anyway, the Dutch become a democratic country after the monarchy dropped the nuclear bomb in Iceland and got everyone very annoyed with them. So they would create the Dutch Reformation Party. This was the right-wing party within the Dutch nation, or republic. There's also, of course, a left-wing party, but the main events that happened during the Cold War period were led by the Dutch Reformation Party, who did some pretty controversial stuff within the nation. As we can see here, the war in Mexico and southern USA, between Texas and both of the Mexican countries, the Dutch played a pivotal role in that war, with the creation of the terrorist group, which is this cool-looking turtle. But yeah, you'd look at this turtle and you'd think they were fine, but nope, terrorist turtle. So that was kind of bad, but that was of course by the DRP. The Dutch during this time also went to war with the English country, the Blue English country, oh poor guy, and also the Red Swiss country. They got involved in like a major war, not in how difficult it was, but in the diplomatic things it was involved in, against the, I'm going to call it Provence, but that red southern French country. The old empire would help out here, and the Dutch would join the old Imperial Economic Alliance, get a new trade deal with the Romans, and also sign a defensive agreement with the French. So that's cool. Anyway, World War III is approaching, so that's bad. The old empire, and their main allies of like Norway and the Farmers Union are going against China and their allies in South China, Tibet, and Russia's got like Kazakhstan and the Green Team, so they're not doing as great as the other guys. Norway would start the war, fighting against the Germans and the Russians, and they'd ask the Dutch, do you want to join the war? This is a great opportunity to get all your land back. How the Dutch would decline. The European front began to grow as countries like Iberia, Dark Cyan Team, Germany, Austria, Norway, Finland, Russia, the Farmers Union, Italy, all got involved. And finally, towards the ending stages of the war, the Dutch would launch a load of nuclear bombs, I think 10, into the Eastern Front, nuking lots of Germany, Austria, and Poland, but they would then start their advance towards Russia, capitulating the country. Following this, the Dutch would get a share of the Red Team's capital area, taking over some of this territory along with India, China, and the Russians, or not the Russians I guess, the Norwegians instead. They would also start the Organization of States, along with Norway, Rome, the Koreans, China, and India, although it would quickly fall apart as the Norwegians and the Romans just left, and then the Koreans left, and then, the Dutch were doing some pretty bad stuff. And the Chinese and the Indians were like, this is going badly. So it would all just fall apart as the Dutch continued to do more expansionist things. Talking about the Dutch, that far-right party within the Dutch Reformation Party? It's now the Dutch Revanchist Party, as they are on a mission to regain all of their lost territory. So that's good. They also put themselves up as the dictators of the country. It was previously led by some sort of oligarchy thing, but yeah, they took over the entire country. They would release countries such as Danzig and Poland in the peace treaty with Russia. However, it wouldn't be too long until they were once again attacking England, Czechia. So this country looks so much cooler here than it does in the actual series, and also Danzig. They would get surrounded by enemies. Although Ireland didn't join the square team, Norway, Poland, the Farmers Union, and Italy all would, or Rome. And yeah, they're in a bad kind of spot. However, they would find new allies in countries such as West Africa, Gold Ethiopia, Brazil, Australia, or Eastern Australia. I like saying Australia. and also West Africa, Orange West Africa. They would get involved in the French Civil War, pretty pertinent to them because of how closely aligned they were with the French historically. They would get the Northern French, like Greater Brittany country. Sorry. Yeah, my throat's very dry. I've been talking like 10 minutes straight. And the Romans would get the Orange Southern French, Spanish sort of country. The Dutch would also start to bother the HRE, the Holy Russian Empire, getting the Muscovy, sort of Ukrainian and Green Russian countries on their side. Krasnodar would just go over here, just be democratic. The Kazakhs would also become a dictatorship, which they were previously, but they'd be more aligned with the Dutch, whilst the Romans would get allies in the Volga and Astrakhan countries. The Dutch would finally, in about 1990 I think it was, get declared war upon by all members of the Square Alliance, so the Norwegians, Polish, Farmers Union and Romans would all start to invade Dutch territory. Luckily, the Dutch have friends, so the North African fascist bloc would send an ultimatum to Rome, which Rome would just tear up and go, nope, we're going to fight you. But yeah, at least you got friends, you got all these guys. That's cool. Even this stupid South Sudanese country. Anyway, the Russians would help the Dutch to partition Poland. Good old historical stuff again. And, the rest of the war would go kind of just like, meh. You move a bit, they move a bit. But the main thing that happened for the Dutch really was the collapse of Iberia for their front, as the West Africans, the Libyans, and the Dark Side team helped the Yellow country and the Dutch to push out the Orange team, the Romans, and the Iberians from this front as we moved further up into Europe. Unfortunately for the Dutch, the Democratic Coalition would start, which also involved some other East Asian countries, but in Europe we had the Greeks, the Irish, the Kazakhs eventually, the Krasnodar country, the Gold team. Oh no, they're back. It's their redemption arc, so this is bad. And Finland getting involved. With the Irish joining, that was very bad for the Dutch, as Ireland took over their Icelandic colony, England, and started to invade the Dutch homeland. With the Irish and the Romans pressing in, the Dutch began to lose. Also, the Polish, I guess, they're also kind of there. They're not really doing a whole lot though. This is the peak Dutch Empire, just before they lost all their land in the peace treaty, so quite a lot of stuff. It's not exact. As you couldn't tell, it's not exact. And in the peace treaty, we would see the Irish take over the rest of the British Isles, Iceland get its independence, Germany be released. I thought I put the Danes in this slide. I don't think I saved that. Never mind. France would be reformed to get some territory back from the Dutch. The Romans would take a load of territory in the Alpine Mountains and look disgusting. The Swiss would get their independence and some more land, and Danzig would get the exact same treatment. The Polish would get a bit more territory, and the Czechians would just be released again. For no reason. Why was this country brought back? I don't know. The Dutch would then create the Octagon Economic Alliance between the countries like the Dark Side, Iberian, French, Swiss, Provence, German, and Dutch countries. Danish? Come on, man. So that's pretty cool. However, they would get pulled into the influence wars in World War V, as the Americans and their allies in countries like India, Mexico, and Norway were going against countries like China with their influential spheres in Russia, South China, which isn't on here, Brazil, and Australia. I kind of just did their strongest team members, so that's why. The Dutch would join the Americans' call to war alongside other Western European countries such as France, the Dark Side, Iberian, and German countries. So that's pretty cool. And now here's a map of the future of the Dutch Empire. So this is what I think they could potentially get if they expanded into the future. So in terms of expansion, the Irish might create a new democratic coalition, and since they're entirely surrounded really by American allies, maybe they're going to lose, and the Dutch could get back into England. They could also potentially unite with the Danes or the Swiss. The Germans could be reunited again with Danzig's a bit unlikely. The French are closely aligned with them, so it's a possibility that they unite with the French, but I feel like it's kind of unlikely. You could see a greater Western European Union though. That is something that is definitely possible, and since the Dutch are currently, they've just had a fall from World War IV, they're currently up in the rise again, so we could see the creation, and almost definitely will see the creation, of a new Dutch Empire. It's just unsure what form that will take. Anyway, if you enjoyed today's episode, like, subscribe, comment, and if there's another country you'd like me to do in this series, please suggest it. Anyway, thanks for watching, and goodbye. Have a nice rest of your day.